intrigued by how Americans try to work with Chinese based upon an American model of thinking. Mr. Cheng, I commend you in your paper for talking about something that most people don't even imagine, and that is the manner in which the Chinese approach something. If I could call your attention to page 5 of your testimony, you make the statement, paragraph 3, line 3, the first issue is that the Chinese do not think the way we do. And then you point that out by way of various examples. And also, the same pattern appears in Mr. Thackitt, and actually across the board. I was at a remarkable meeting of the U.S.-China Business Council on April 22nd of 2004. And I wrote this down, keep it in my BlackBerry, as quoting Madam Wu Li, at the time, who was, I guess, the equivalent of the Secretary of Treasury, perhaps. And she said that China has a, quote, market-based, managed, unitary floating exchange rate. And I wrote that down, and I said, this can't be. And then my aide there said, well, this is in the official English translation of what she said in Chinese. And what is particularly bothersome is the fact that we tend to deal with the Chinese based upon Western thinking. And I just want to throw that out to Mr. Cheng and other members of the panel. And I know you agree with me on that, but talk about it and the impact it has on American diplomacy with China.
In brief, sir, I would submit the following, that in many ways, we tend to think of China as a rising power, and we think of ourselves as a status quo power, which is hardly surprising given that we're happy with where we are after about 250 years of history. I would suggest that China actually thinks of itself as a status quo power. The problem is how you define the status quo. For us, in our history, China has always been a weak power and only now has been rising over the last, say, 20 years. For China, with its 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years of history, it has almost always been the dominant power in Asia and for therefore the known world for them. China, therefore, is seeking to reestablish itself. This is not Germany in 1900, newly unified. This is a country that sees itself as returning to the world stage in its proper place. That's a very different perspective.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Dr. Favell?
Well, just a different example would be Chinese negotiating behavior. So, for example, in many Chinese negotiations, the Chinese will want to first talk about principles and get agreement upon principles, and then sort of establish a friendship or reach an agreement. Whereas I think the American approach is sort of the opposite. You reach the agreement first, and then you sort of become friends afterwards. And so I think it creates a lot of challenges in negotiations with China, and I think it's very important to understand what these differences are and how they will affect various aspects of U.S. foreign policy.
Dr. Wurtzel?
Well, I think that we want to stick to a Western viewpoint because essentially those are the legal norms and the international norms by which the world conducts itself, conducts warfare and trade. I think the mistake that we sometimes make is to think that Chinese perceptions and policy mirrors our way of looking at it. So I think it's very important to understand, as Dr. Chung did, how the Chinese, or Mr. Chung, how the Chinese think about things. But I don't think we should depart from a Western viewpoint. The whole goal of our policy in the World Trade Organization is to get them to adopt that, or at least live by it.
Mr.
Tasic.
Tesic.
I would just say that China is no longer a rule taker. China is now a rule maker in the international system, and imagine what the world's going to be like when China makes the rules.
Thank you very much.